So I want to tell you about a company called Builder AI. This is hilarious. This company was founded by a guy called Sachin Dugal, and he was named Entrepreneur of the Year last year. The whole idea of the company is to make building an app as easy as possible. The proposition was that like anyone could just visit this website, use their AI, and just build an app of their choice. Specifically, they had this service called Natasha, an AI chatbot, which allowed you to just like tippy tap your desired app, and it would spit out whatever you wanted within a few hours. Except it was not necessarily all that it seemed to be, because in this case, AI didn't actually stand for artificial intelligence. AI was actually Indians. So this AI chatbot turned out to be 700 engineers sat in India who would take your prompt, physically code the app themselves, and then give you it back. In terms of scale, by the way, this company was worth $1.5 billion, and it had been backed by both Microsoft and the Qatari government. And overnight, it collapsed. Now it's in bankruptcy, and it owes millions of dollars to creditors, and tons of people have been put out of a job. There is some good news, though. The founder of this company walked away with $20 million in share sales. So on this occasion, the little guy actually won, at least. But the reason I'm telling you about this is it's an example of a way that like AI is often misrepresented, and it relies on people way more than you might initially realize. This one's a bit more wacky, but other ones are a little bit more dark, I would say. So usually when we talk about AI, a lot of the discourse focuses on jobs in already relatively wealthy countries. Usually how it's going to replace white collar jobs, how it's going to replace artistic jobs and creative work, like, you know, writers, filmmakers, and artists. But it's already actually started to replace a significant amount of people, just maybe not in the places you would necessarily expect when you hear about AI replacing jobs. And they're actually the people who are responsible in the first place for AI itself existing. And to understand what's happening here, we need to just briefly talk about Venezuela. So I had a whole section prepared earlier about like the Venezuelan economy, but I think I can be a bit more concise in how we explain what's going on in Venezuela. Specifically with this one headline: World of Warcraft currency is now worth 7 times as much as Venezuela's cash. Effectively, things are really quite rough over there. And at its peak, inflation in Venezuela hit 2 million% per year. And the currency was so worthless that people would make art and clothes and handbags out of the currency, because those items would hold their value better than the actual money. This is to say, basically, you know, never go band for band with a Venezuelan, right? But the situation in Venezuela has led a lot of people to leave. And the people who are left in Venezuela have had to get really creative with the work that they find. One of the only surviving industries in Venezuela is gig work, specifically online work for AI companies. You know, when we talk about AI, I think most of us have like an understanding that AI uses like huge amounts of training data, and that training data is obtained in pretty questionably legal ways. Currently, most of the big AI companies are being sued for stealing data. However, there's a whole like other side to this training process that often goes missed, because once this data has been acquired, a lot of it has to be manually labeled and tagged, whether it's text data or visual data, and they have to prep the data in quite extensive detail in order for the AI companies to be able to make any use of it. It's basically the same thing that you do when you're doing like a captcha puzzle. However, the version of it that they do is a lot less fun than just filling in captchas. They have to watch content like in order to prevent the AIs from being able to reproduce those same things. It's basically the worst stuff you could imagine. But what makes this even worse is that in the process, they're not even creating themselves a stable job or career in producing this content for AI companies. They're actually literally training their replacement, because companies like OpenAI have been taking this training data and using it to build an automated detector that could easily tell whether the AI was producing any illegal material. And all the workers have been left with has been trauma, basically. What makes this worse is that because it's contracted out to poor countries, a significant amount of the workforce is actually underage. The situation that we've got is one where AI companies have created these third world sweatshops, effectively, much like clothing companies, where they can outsource the darkest and worst part of their company to a country that has a collapsing economy. Whether it's Kenya, which has had like youth unemployment rate in the 80%, or Venezuela, which has had 2 million% inflation, or India, which obviously can skirt the law in a way that OpenAI wouldn't want to openly do themselves. And in the process, they are quite literally training their replacement. This is all for the tidy wage of about $1.50 to $2 an hour before tax. And when you read the testimonies of the people who are forced to do this work, it's pretty grim, if I'm honest. This is one worker who says that there are so many promises. You're told that your life is going to be changed, that you're going to be given so many opportunities. But I wouldn't say it's helping anyone. It's just taking advantage of people. For many of these companies, the process works by, first of all, hiring a third-party company to work with training data that's relatively innocuous. So, for example, self-driving car data, or just simple snippets of text from the news. And once the business relationship is established, they'll do like a bait and switch on them and push them to moderate more and more extreme content. And once the AI detector is sufficiently well trained, all of these staff get laid off. Many of the people who work for these companies have no idea how bad the job is actually going to be until they've already had months of training on more innocuous content. And this has been concentrated in countries where the economy has completely collapsed. And it's left the workers on the other side with like little to no choice. And just like the situation with Builder AI, where all of the Indians who were doing the actual work were laid off as soon as the fraud was unraveled, and the CEO walked away with 20 plus million in share sales, the same thing is happening in this data labeling situation. Scale AI, which is one of the biggest American startups in this space, just got a $14 billion investment from Meta, and the CEO got a job at Meta as well. At the same time, they decided to lay off 14% of their staff, along with hundreds of contractors in other countries. The data labelers who actually created the product that made this company so valuable in the first place literally worked themselves out of a job overnight, simply because the company was now valuable enough to be sold off. Yeah, they did a bit too good of a job. Losso says, is unionizing illegal in Kenya or Venezuela? Well, the risks of unionizing are a lot higher when you're getting paid $2 an hour. They could unionize, but people are in such a precarious situation that the incentive of unionizing is a lot more risky. The reason why these companies specifically target places like Venezuela and Kenya is because they know that the economies there are so on the brink that workers are not going to be as combative. And this is a pattern that's not just in AI, but is really, I think, targeted towards basically every worker. More and more, you're seeing a shift towards startups and companies that just replace a job that exists with a much more precarious version of it and extract like the value differential between the two. And I think that's the goal, not just in poor countries, but basically everywhere. Uber is a great example, I think. Uber didn't get rid of taxis, but it did replace them with a dodgier version, with a less safe and less secure version, where they didn't have to bear any of the risk and they could reap the benefits of the difference without ever fully disclosing it to the customer on the other end. At the same time, they can take the data from their drivers and use it to help build out their driverless car division and ultimately replace those drivers. Even in the driverless car space, workers are being used to train their own replacement without them seeing any of the gains. Amazon, for example, literally offers a service called Amazon Mechanical Turk. And the whole reason for this service to exist is for you to hire people to do these like little jobs where you can extract all of the value and leave them cooked. If you don't know what the Mechanical Turk is, it was a scam in the 18th century where a guy claimed to have invented a machine that could play chess better than any human, but it was actually just like a guy sat inside of a box with a lid. I think this is another example of like tech bros reading a story and like completely missing the point. And Amazon has literally got a service that's marketed after that. The whole idea of this is to present an image to the end user that the service is automated and arguably more ethical than a previous iteration. But under the hood, it really is just a guy in a box doing the actual work for a fraction of the pay. This whole setup is like so obfuscated, and the people have such little knowledge of what's happening that the reaction from the staff isn't necessarily to turn against the company, but the workers turn against each other. If you followed like the rise of Uber, you had taxi drivers and Uber drivers having like huge beef. And you see the similar thing with these gig workers turning against each other as the margins get slimmer and slimmer and being increasingly wary of new people coming into the business. Meanwhile, the AI companies are just extracting value nonstop out of this, while the workers get turned against each other. In this setup, like every worker is an independent contractor who works for a middleman company so that the tech company at the end of the chain can feign ignorance throughout the whole process. However, you got to ask if they're advertising in Venezuela, I think they know what they're doing. And employee protections don't really matter in that world because you aren't a real employee. There's a common motto in tech of like move fast and break things. However, when things are broken, it's rarely the executives or the people who are forcing the move who bear any of the consequence. The risk is outsourced and the reward are centralized. That's what's been done here. And as AI is moving up the value chain, it's going to try and do this setup with more and more people. So these companies are now looking for scientists to label even more complex data. They're looking for artists to come and work for them to produce training materials. So yeah, I guess next time you're using your AI, I would tell you to ask yourself, is this an AI or is this actually Indians? Hey yo, thanks for watching. If you feel like you learned something and you want another way to support the channel that's completely free, please consider joining my Patreon. It is linked in the description below and probably in the corner of the screen somewhere. I'm trying to make an effort to create some community outside of YouTube, and if that sounds like it might be up your street, then head on over. Did I mention it's free? Yes, it's free. Yeah, come on, click on it, okay? Okay, love you. Bye-bye. Take care.